It's a pleasure to join you this evening, and I'm really pleased to be able to share some thoughts with our European counterparts, because ultimately it is about greater European unity that we're going to be able to challenge some of the issues that we're facing here today. And can I just say, personally, really pleased to see David. You and I cross paths every so often. Croatia, I think, was the last time. Great to be sharing a platform with you once again. Lots of people described what we're going through now as a tipping point, a moment in history, and I wouldn't disagree with that. The deeper question is what we're actually going to do about it. I have every confidence that the Europe that emerges from this crisis will be far more committed to defending democracy, will probably see a return to Cold War levels of defense spend, and no doubt will see us, perhaps with a bit more resolute determination, be able to stand up to countries such as Russia, even though they may pose nuclear weapons, without thinking that things are going to ratchet out of control. But right now, we're not there. And right now, we are far too timid in expressing our strengths, in providing our support for Ukraine. We're providing the goodies for them to take on the fight against Russia, but we're really leaving them to it. We're distancing ourselves from any rather wider responsibility of taking on Russia. And if I can put it rather dramatically, and I don't wish to dismiss the destruction, the mayhem, the genocide, the war crimes that are taking place in Ukraine, but this is a mere skirmish from what could potentially lay ahead. And how we conduct ourselves over the next few weeks, months, and indeed next couple of years, in my view, will actually determine how our next few decades play out. I grew up in Vienna, in Austria. My father worked at the United Nations, and in the 80s, I remember the Cold War. I remember the Iron Curtain was very much not far from Vienna, going to Czechoslovakia or Hungary at the time, when we crossed into the border there, and the feeling that there was this superpower that had a different ideological perspective on the world, and that we had to be prepared for the unthinkable. There were bridges in Vienna which had those big iron girders underneath them, and I remember asking my father, "What are those for?" And that, imagine, is in case the Soviets actually chose to somehow advance, to the West. We've had 30 years of luxury. We've had 30 years of peace. We've had 30 years where we have now come to enjoy a different form of life. And unfortunately, this, we need to recognize, is unusual. The world is now resorting to type, where there are state-on-state aggressors, and we have to actually work much harder to defend our international rules-based order. And what we're seeing right now, and this is why it's so critical for us to wake up and recognize the pace in which things are changing, is the fact that we're seeing an ideological, geopolitical splinter take place across our world. For it isn't, as I say, just Russia itself we should pay attention to, but it's the conduct of China that sits behind Russia. China has not condemned the invasion that's taken place. I think it actually, my view is that it actually quite enjoys Putin doing the front of house things, annoying the West, keeping us busy, keeping us distracted from otherwise paying attention to what China is up to. And I think China is very committed. They think in terms of decades. They are much more strategic in their thought, long term, compared with us, which tend to think in election cycles. Perhaps Putin can be dispensed with, but ultimately that bond with Russia will be critical. They both share a dislike for the West. They both have a disdain for the ability of America to dominate our international rules-based order, and they want to be able to exploit the perhaps ineffectiveness of our weak international institutions for their own benefit. And I'm afraid, whilst many of us have predicted this for some time, it is now happening today. It is now happening in front of us. And it's the hesitance of the United States which perhaps concerns me the most, but provides an opportunity for us in Europe to look at the theatre of operations on the continent in particular, to ask ourselves what more we can do. I really welcome and encourage the direction of travel of Germany to move so swiftly, $100 billion or euros or whatever it is, investment in your armed forces. What a change that is to then recognize that you need to take a much more proactive involvement in European security. It's going to require some adult conversations to get through some of these issues. The comments by the Prime Minister this weekend on Brexit, which I responded to and criticized, we need to move beyond that, because ultimately it is this disunity, this discord across Europe that Russia has been able to exploit. My concern at the moment is that the sanctions that we have in place, whilst they will ultimately lead to the demise and an eventual removal of Putin, because there is no return for Russia to the international stage, there is no return for its economy to strengthen with him in charge, he can do a huge amount of damage in Ukraine and beyond before eventually somehow he's removed. And at the moment, we have NATO sitting on the doorstep of Ukraine, feeding in munitions and so forth, but leaving Ukraine to do all the heavy lifting. And we need to find our previous Cold War levels of statecraft skills to start to stand up, recognize those threats, place them in perspective, and allow ourselves to provide solutions which are proportional, but allow us to control the escalatory ladder without things spiraling out of control. And this is the big question for us to recognize, that America may not be there to the extent that we would want. As leaders of the Western world, we need to start looking at providing our own solutions to security, to diplomacy, to democracy, to defending democracy in Europe, as we embark on what I believe will be a very, very testing decade indeed.